All right, let's kick off another deep dive. This time we're going to tackle NATO.
NATO.
Yeah, 75 years keeping Europe, mostly war-free.
It's pretty impressive.
It really is. So we're looking at an article called NATO's 75-Year Journey, Strengths, Weaknesses, and the Future of European Security
Okay.
from Investor. And, the big question, right? Everyone's asking this, especially after what's happening in Ukraine. Can this alliance, keep up with the times? Can it change with this crazy world we're living in?
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. It's not just surviving. It's grown
Yeah.
from, back in the Cold War, just 12 members, to now 32 nations.
Wow.
Talk about a billion people under its protection.
It is mind-blowing when you really, really think about it. I mean, after World War II, right, you had sworn enemies, Germany, the U.S., coming together like, hey, let's do this defense thing.
Huge amount of trust.
It had to, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So the article really gets into, like, what makes NATO tick. Its strengths. And one thing that really jumped out was the command structure.
Okay.
Like, for such a big, complicated organization, it's surprisingly strong.
Yeah.
How does that even work?
Well, it's all about consensus.
Okay.
Every single member, right. They get a say.
They have to agree.
They got to agree before anything big happens.
Makes sense.
And then for the military stuff, member states, they chip in, they provide the troops for these joint missions.
Okay.
What's interesting is NATO itself, they don't have their own army.
Really?
It's all about the members pooling resources.
Yeah. It's like this massive team effort.
It is.
With like the highest stakes you can imagine.
Absolutely.
So for decades, it was all about the Soviet Union, right? The Cold War, then boom, wall comes down in 91.
Yeah.
Did NATO just like pack it up? We're done.
Not at all. Had to adapt.
Yeah.
Shift gears. Think about new problems.
Global stuff.
Global terrorism. We saw them in Afghanistan, Libya, for example.
Right.
These were totally different operations.
From what they were used to.
Yeah, needed smaller, more specialized forces.
Yeah.
Some people say maybe that took focus away from the main defense stuff they were good at.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That shift, it seems like that's key to understanding where NATO's at right now,
I think so.
And then 2022, bam. Everything changes.
Yeah.
Russia invades Ukraine.
Yeah.
And suddenly all those post-Cold War ideas about Europe being safe, gone out the window.
Big wake-up call, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
It showed weaknesses, especially some European members. They'd gotten a little complacent about, their own defenses.
Yeah, that leads us to, the article talks about some weaknesses.
Right.
And one, it was kind of glaring, Europe relying too much on the U.S. for defense.
Yeah.
Is that accurate, would you say?
I think so. The article, they quote these military experts.
Okay.
And they're basically saying a lot of European nations, even together, they'd struggle with a medium-sized conflict without the U.S. stepping in a big way.
It's kind of ironic, right? Because NATO was partly like to help Europe be more independent on defense.
It was.
So what happened? Why are they so reliant on us?
Well, over the years, a lot of European countries, they cut their defense spending a lot, focused on other things, figured big wars in Europe, that's over.
Right, that's history.
Yeah, so they're less ready for what Russia's doing now.
And then on top of that, the article talks about this bureaucracy in NATO.
Oh, yeah.
Red tape, countries not agreeing on things, logistical nightmares.
Yeah.
It makes it sound like reacting quickly, forget it, impossible.
It's super tough. Imagine trying to get military stuff across like all these different European borders.
Right, different countries.
Different rules everywhere, customs, permissions, you need this, you need that.
Sounds like a mess.
It can be a huge headache, especially when time is like the most important thing.
Absolutely.
And that brings up serious questions. Can NATO be quick enough to deal with these threats that are changing so fast?
Especially with like the whole global picture, right?
Yeah.
New threats popping up all the time.
It's
not just a Europe thing anymore.
No, it's not.
The article mentions China, like becoming a superpower,
Right.
and the Middle East. Everything's shifting there.
Yeah.
How does that all play into NATO's, what they're supposed to be doing, which was, at least at the beginning, all about Europe?
Yeah, that's a big one.
It is.
Can't just focus on that one area anymore.
Right.
These problems are global. Got to think bigger, more connections,
So are we saying, like, NATO needs to be the world's police now, intervening everywhere?
Not exactly. More like realizing that threats, they don't care about borders.
No, they don't.
And working together is usually the best way to tackle them,
Okay.
Like China's getting powerful in Africa.
Right.
That affects Europe, even if it's not like an immediate military thing.
I see what you're saying. Everything's connected.
It is.
But doesn't expanding what NATO does, like, stretch them too thin? And wouldn't that make Russia and China angry? Like,
Yeah.
hey, you're stepping on our toes.
Definitely valid concern.
Yeah.
There's a big debate inside NATO. How global should they get?
Right, right.
Some people say be more assertive, push back against these authoritarian regimes, step in, protect democracy.
Right, those are like the hawks.
Exactly, the hawks. Then you got the doves,
Doves.
more cautious, diplomacy, talking it out, that's their thing.
Right.
They worry that, getting too aggressive, it could make things worse.
Escalate things.
Yeah, unintended consequences,
And with all these different opinions, it must be like almost impossible to agree on like what to do.
It's tough. Constant balancing act, project strength, deter the bad guys, but don't do anything that'll start a bigger war.
Mm. The stakes are like as high as they get.
They really are.
And the article makes a point about it's not just about the big players, Russia, China.
Right.
You got to consider the smaller countries too, right?
Absolutely, especially the ones who've, been pushed around by bigger powers in the past.
Like the Baltic states we were talking about.
Exactly. They're worried about Russia, understandably.
Right.
And a lot of Eastern Europe, they were under Soviet control. They feel vulnerable. And you got to take that seriously.
It's a lot to manage.
It is.
So with all this, with everything we're talking about,
Yeah.
how does the article see NATO's future? Is it optimistic? Are they pessimistic?
Cautiously optimistic, I'd say.
Oh, okay.
They know it's tough, huge challenges.
Right.
But NATO's got this track record. They're resilient. They adapt.
They've done it before.
Yeah. And it's good news that so many European countries are saying, okay, we'll spend more on defense after Ukraine.
Okay.
Shows they're realizing they need to do more for their own security.
But just spending more, that won't solve everything, right?
No, it won't.
What about all that bureaucracy, the logistical stuff we were talking about?
Yeah.
Are they trying to fix that?
There are efforts, definitely. Trying to streamline the decision-making, make the logistics smoother.
Okay.
Like, they set up this joint support and enabling command in 2021.
Right. I remember you mentioning that. What does that actually do? How does that make things better?
So, picture this. NATO needs to get troops somewhere fast to a member state that's in trouble.
Okay.
In the past, it was a nightmare. Coordinating with all these different governments, different rules, customs, everything's slow.
Yeah.
This joint support command, it's supposed to fix that.
Okay.
There's like a central hub. They make the procedures the same. They get equipment and supplies ready in advance, and they cut through all that bureaucratic junk.
So it's like a command center that can just make things happen faster.
Easy.
Cut through the red tape.
Yeah, smoother, more efficient deployments, which is super crucial when, every minute counts.
Right, when there's a crisis going on.
Exactly.
Sounds like they're actually doing something concrete to address those weaknesses that, we saw with Ukraine.
They are. And it's not just about the military stuff.
Oh, okay.
They're also trying to work more with other countries, other organizations,
Okay.
realizing that to deal with these global threats, you got to team up.
Right.
We see this with their outreach to Asia Pacific, for example.
So it's like a multi-pronged approach.
It is.
Military, diplomacy, international cooperation, all of that.
Precisely.
And it's still a work in progress, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
NATO's always trying to adapt. World's changing. It's not guaranteed they'll succeed, right?
Right.
But the fact that they're like actively trying to deal with all this,
Yeah.
that's a good sign.
It is a good sign.
It sounds like a lot of work to do, but also like a real determination there.
They're
a willingness to learn from what's happened.
Absolutely. That's what I get from the article, too. It's not all sunshine and roses, but it's not hopeless either.
Right.
It really comes down to, can NATO step up and meet these challenges in this new world we're living in?
Okay, so we talked about the challenges, the efforts to adapt, the need for unity, global engagement.
Right.
But what about the potential roadblocks?
Mm-hmm.
What could actually mess this up? What could derail NATO's efforts to stay relevant, stay effective in the future?
That's a huge question, and the article, it doesn't shy away from it.
Okay, so let's get into it. What are the biggest threats to NATO's future?
Well, one of the biggest risks is divisions within the alliance itself.
Internal divisions.
Yeah, like we said, different opinions on how to handle Russia,
Right.
how much to do globally, how much each country should contribute, money, troops, all of that.
Right. So finding that common ground,
Yeah,
That unity, that shared purpose, that's going to be crucial.
absolutely.
But is that even possible? I mean, you've got so many different interests, different viewpoints within NATO.
It's a huge challenge.
Yeah.
And it's made even harder by, the rise of populism, nationalism in some of these member states.
Oh, right.
They often push this us versus them thing, which undermines the whole idea of international cooperation, which is what NATO's all about.
So the threats from within, they're just as real as the threats from outside.
I'd say even more so sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's a big point the article makes. NATO's strength, its unity, if that breaks down, the whole alliance is weaker.
Yeah, that's a sobering thought.
It is.
Any other potential roadblocks we should be thinking about?
Yeah, another big one is warfare itself is changing.
Right.
New technologies, AI, cyber warfare, hypersonic missiles, all this stuff.
Yeah, it's changing the whole game, the whole battlefield
It is.
in ways we don't even fully understand yet.
Exactly.
So NATO has to not only keep up with all this tech, but also figure out how to defend against it.
Exactly. They need to invest a lot in research and development, update their strategies, their training to deal with all these new threats.
It's like a constant game of catch-up,
It is. It's tough.
trying to stay one step ahead of the bad guys.
Absolutely. And it's even harder because these technologies, it's not just countries developing them.
Right.
Non-state actors, terrorist groups, criminals, they're getting their hands on this stuff.
Right. It's not just like one country versus another anymore.
No. It's
The lines are blurry.
exactly. And that's another challenge for NATO, their traditional model focused on, stopping a country from attacking another country. It might not work so well against these more kind of scattered and unpredictable threats.
Right. Right.
It's a whole new ballgame.
Okay, so we've got internal divisions, technology changing like crazy, the lines between like countries and non-state actors blurring.
Uh-huh.
Anything else that could throw a wrench in the works for NATO?
One last thing I'd mention is public opinion.
Oh, okay.
Support for NATO. It's gone up since Ukraine,
Yeah.
but it's not a sure thing that'll last forever.
Why not? I mean, isn't it in everyone's interest to have a strong military alliance?
In theory, yes, but maintaining that strong alliance, it's expensive.
Huh.
Countries have to spend a lot on defense, which isn't always popular, especially when times are tough economically.
Right, everyone's feeling the pinch.
Exactly. And as the threats get harder to see, harder to explain,
Yeah.
it's tougher to convince people that we need to spend all this money on defense.
So NATO's got a PR problem.
Kind of. They need to get better at explaining why they matter,
Right.
highlighting their successes,
Yeah.
showing how they're making the world safer.
Not just talking to governments, talking to the people.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, it's the people who pay the price of war.
Right. And they're the ones who decide whether their government should support NATO or not.
Absolutely. So it's all about transparency, communication, making that case for why collective security, it's good for everybody.
It makes sense.
And it's also about admitting that NATO isn't perfect.
Right. They've made mistakes.
They have, and they need to keep learning, keep changing.
Being open to change.
Exactly. If they want to stay relevant, stay effective, they can't be stuck in the past.
Right.
They got to adapt to this crazy world that's changing so fast.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive so far.
We have.
From NATO's beginnings to the challenges they're facing now to their vision for the future.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. And I think the big takeaway is NATO is at a crossroads.
Yeah.
Big time.
They've got a choice. Hang on to the past, the old ways of doing things, or embrace the future, adapt to these new realities, and come out of it even stronger, more effective.
It's like they're standing at a fork in the road.
Yeah.
One path leads to like irrelevance. The other path leads to a renewed purpose, a really vital role in shaping global security.
Exactly.
And the decisions they make in the next few years, I mean, they're going to have a huge impact on the world we live in.
Absolutely. Huge impact.
Well, listeners, that's it for this part of our deep dives into NATO.
Okay.
Hopefully you've got a better understanding of this complex, always changing alliance.
Yeah.
Like we've been saying, the future of NATO and really the future of global security, it's uncertain.
It is.
But one thing's for sure, the choices we make today, they're going to shape the world of tomorrow. So stay informed, join the conversation, make your voice heard.
Absolutely.
Because the future, it's not something that just happens to us.
Right.
It's something we create together.
That's a good way to put it.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Back again, continuing our deep dive into NATO's future, using this Investor article as our guide.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, the more we talk about it, the more I realize how complicated all this is.
It really is. Keeping the peace, in the 21st century.
Right.
It's like walking a tightrope, especially for an organization like NATO.
Yeah.
So many different priorities, different perspectives.
Yeah, the article uses this phrase, strategic ambiguity,
Okay.
when they talk about how NATO deals with, like, Russia, potential adversaries. I'll be honest, I was kind of lost at first.
It's a bit of a head scratcher.
Yeah,
I'll give you that.
yeah.
Basically, it means NATO has to be clear about defending its members, but not make specific threats
Okay.
or promises that could, like, lock them into doing something specific. It's like saying, we'll defend our allies, but we're not going to tell you exactly how W, so don't even try us.
So it's about being strong, but not, like, poking the bear.
Exactly. Keeping your options open, being adaptable, a little unpredictable.
Gotcha.
Because the world's always changing, NATO can't be caught off guard.
Makes sense. And speaking of a changing world, the article talks a lot about China
Right.
becoming this global power, and then the Middle East, all the changes there.
Right.
How does that all fit in with NATO's mission? I mean, originally it was all about Europe, right?
That's the question, isn't it? NATO can't afford to just focus on that one area anymore.
Right.
These challenges, they're global, got to think bigger, more connected.
So does that mean NATO needs to be like the world's police force, intervening in every conflict?
Not necessarily, more like recognizing that threats, they don't stop at borders.
No, they don't.
And working together is often the best way to deal with them.
Right.
Like China's influence in Africa, that matters for European security, even if it's not an immediate military threat. I see everything's connected.
Exactly.
But doesn't expanding NATO's focus, like, risk overstretching them?
It could.
And wouldn't that, like, really tick off countries like Russia and China?
Right.
They might see it as, NATO trying to muscle in on their turf.
Those are valid concerns, and there's a lot of debate within NATO about how far they should go with this global engagement.
Okay.
Some people say be more assertive, push back against these authoritarian regimes, intervene to protect democratic values.
Right, like the hawks.
Exactly, the hawks. Then you have the doves.
Right.
They're more cautious. They favor diplomacy, talking things out.
Right, dialogue.
They worry that being too aggressive could escalate things, lead to unintended consequences.
Unintended consequences, yeah, that's always a worry.
Definitely.
And with all these different opinions, it must be tough to find common ground.
It is. It's a balancing act. Project strength, deter aggression, but don't provoke a bigger conflict.
Right, it's like walking a tightrope.
And the article makes a good point. It's not just about the big players like Russia and China.
Right.
You got to consider the smaller countries, too.
Absolutely, especially the ones that have, a history of being dominated by bigger powers.
Like the Baltic states?
Exactly. They're understandably worried about Russia.
Makes sense.
And many countries in Eastern Europe, they were under Soviet control, they feel vulnerable, and their concerns need to be taken seriously.
So, with all these complexities, how does the article see NATO's future? Are they optimistic, pessimistic?
Cautiously optimistic, I'd say.
Okay.
They acknowledge the challenges are huge, but they also point to NATO's history.
Right.
They've been resilient, they've adapted
I've
before.
done it before.
And the fact that so many European countries are saying, okay, we'll increase defense spending after Ukraine, that's a positive sign.
Okay.
It shows they're realizing they need to do more for their own security.
But just spending more money, that's not a magic solution, right?
Oh, of course not.
What about all those bureaucratic hurdles, the logistical challenges?
Yeah.
Is there any sign that those are being addressed?
There are efforts, definitely.
Yeah.
Streamlining decision-making, improving logistical coordination.
Okay.
For example, setting up the joint support and enabling command. That's a step in the right direction.
You mentioned that earlier, but can you remind me how that actually works?
Sure. Imagine NATO needs to deploy troops quickly to a member state that's facing a threat.
Okay.
In the past, that would have been a nightmare. Coordinating with all these different governments, regulations, customs procedures, logistical bottlenecks.
Yeah, sounds like a mess.
It often was. The Joint Support and Enabling Command is designed to fix that.
Okay, so it's like a central command center that can cut through the red tape and make things happen faster.
Exactly. It helps standardize procedures, preposition equipment, and supplies, make sure everyone's on the same page.
So it's like a well-oiled machine.
That's the goal. It allows for smoother, more efficient deployments, which is crucial when time is of the essence.
Right, when every minute counts.
Exactly.
So it sounds like they are taking concrete steps to address some of the weaknesses that the Ukraine invasion exposed.
They are. And it's not just about military capabilities.
Right.
They're also working to strengthen partnerships with other countries, other organizations,
Okay.
recognizing that collective action is essential for dealing with global threats. We're seeing this with their outreach to countries in the Asia-Pacific region, for example.
So it's a multi-pronged approach,
It is combining military strength with diplomacy and international cooperation.
and it's still a work in progress, right?
Absolutely. NATO is constantly adapting to the changing global landscape, and there are no guarantees.
Right, no guarantees.
But the fact that they're actively engaging with these challenges, that's a positive sign.
It seems like there's a lot of work to be done, but there's also a sense of determination, a willingness to learn from past mistakes.
That's what I get from the article as well. It's not a rosy picture, but it's not hopeless either. It really comes down to whether NATO can rise to the occasion and meet the challenges of this new era.
So we've talked about the challenges, the efforts to adapt, the need for unity and global engagement.
Right.
But what about the potential roadblocks?
Hmm.
What are some of the things that could derail NATO's efforts to stay relevant and effective in the future?
That's a critical question, and one that the article doesn't shy away from.
Okay, well, let's dive into those potential roadblocks then. What are the biggest threats to NATO's future?
One of the most significant risks is the potential for internal divisions within the alliance.
Internal divisions, right?
Like we said, different views on how best to approach Russia, how aggressively to pursue global engagement, how much each member state should contribute financially and militarily.
So finding that common ground, that sense of unity and purpose, that's going to be crucial.
It's essential. And it's made even more difficult by the rise of populism and nationalism in some member states.
Right, those us versus them ideologies.
Exactly. They undermine the spirit of international cooperation that NATO relies on.
So the internal threats are just as real as the external ones, maybe even more so.
Yes, and that's a point the article really drives home. NATO's strength lies in its unity. If that unity fractures, the entire alliance is weakened.
It's a sobering thought.
It is.
Are there any other potential roadblocks we should be aware of?
Another major challenge is the evolving nature of warfare itself. We're seeing the rise of new technologies, things like artificial intelligence, cyber warfare, hypersonic missiles.
Right.
All of these are changing the battlefield in fundamental ways.
So NATO needs to not only keep up with these technological advancements, but also figure out how to defend against them.
Exactly. This requires significant investment in research and development, as well as adapting military doctrines and training.
So they need to be tech-savvy, adaptable, and able to anticipate what's coming next.
That's a good way to put it. And it highlights another important point, intelligence gathering and analysis. NATO needs to be able to identify emerging threats, understand their capabilities, and develop strategies to counter them.
So it's not just about reacting to what's happening, but trying to anticipate what might happen next.
Precisely. It's about proactive defense, not just reactive.
Okay, so we've got internal divisions, rapidly evolving technology, and the blurring of lines between state and non-state actors.
Right.
Is there anything else that could throw a wrench into NATO's plans?
One final challenge I'd mention is public opinion. While support for NATO has increased since the Ukraine invasion, it's not guaranteed to last.
Why not? Isn't it in everyone's best interest to have a strong military alliance?
In theory, yes, but maintaining a strong military alliance is expensive.
Right.
It requires member states to spend a lot on defense, which can be unpopular, especially when times are tough economically.
Yeah, when people are struggling to make ends meet, they might not want to see more money going to the military.
Exactly. And as threats become more diffuse, less tangible, it can be harder to convince the public that those investments are necessary.
So NATO needs to do a better job of communicating the value of the alliance, the importance of collective security.
Absolutely. They need to make a compelling case for why NATO matters, not just to governments, but to ordinary citizens as well.
Right. It's about winning hearts and minds.
Exactly. And that's a battle that NATO is fighting every single day.
Wow. This is a lot to process. We've covered so much ground, the challenges, the potential roadblocks, the need for adaptation and unity.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, what does the article say about what success looks like for NATO in the future? What are the goals they should be striving for?
That's a great question, and it's one that the article tackles head on.
Okay, so let's break those down. What does a successful future for NATO look like?
Well, first and foremost,
Okay, so we left off talking about what a successful future for NATO might look like. What are the goals they should be striving for?
right, the article, it lays out a few key things.
What's at the top of that list? What's number one?
Well, got to make sure they're collective defense. The whole idea of working together to protect each other. It's got to be strong, got to be believable, got to actually deter any potential aggression against a member state.
That's key.
Yeah, and if deterrence fails, They got to be able to win.
Right. Actually defeat the threat.
It's about sending that message. You attack one of us. You attack all of us.
Right. It's that whole all for one for all thing.
Exactly. Article 5. But it can't just be words on paper. Got to have the muscle to back it up.
The political will.
The logistics, the public support.
Yeah, it all has to be
Got
there.
to show they're united, they're serious. So anyone thinking about messing with them, they think twice.
We've talked a lot about Europe needing to do more, be more self-sufficient.
Right.
But realistically, can they really handle a major threat without the U.S.?
That's the big question.
It is.
The article suggests that the U.S. is going to be a key partner for a while.
Right, probably.
But European countries, they got to step it up big time.
Right.
Invest more in their own defense, get better at working together, be able to act on their own if they have to.
So it's about, like, sharing the responsibility more fairly.
Exactly.
Not just expecting the U.S. to be the world's police.
Right, and also realizing that the U.S., they've got their own global stuff going on.
Yeah, of course.
They might not always be able to focus on Europe first.
That's a good point. It's not about pushing the U.S. away. It's about Europe doing more to pull their own weight.
Right, absolutely, contributing more to their own defense and to the bigger goals of NATO.
Which brings us back to, the article talks about this a lot, NATO adapting to how warfare is changing.
Right.
It's something we've touched on, but it's so important.
It is, yeah. All these new technologies, the cyber stuff, it's changing so fast, it's hard to keep up.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like every day there's something new to worry about.
It's a challenge. NATO's got to invest big time in research and development, update their equipment, their strategies, and train their forces to fight in these new ways.
So they need to be, like, tech savvy, adaptable,
Yeah.
and able to, like, see into the future almost.
Almost like they need a crystal ball for threats.
Yeah, exactly. And that makes me think about, like, intelligence gathering, right?
Absolutely.
NATO needs to be able to spot these threats early,
Yeah,
figure out what they can do, and then come up with ways to counter them.
exactly. It's not just about reacting to what's already happening. It's about anticipating what might happen next.
Proactive defense, not just reactive.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got collective defense, Europe stepping up, adapting to new technologies. What else is on the checklist for a successful future?
The article talks about out-of-area operations.
Out of area, what does that mean?
It means working with partners outside of NATO's traditional area, beyond Europe,
Okay.
to deal with shared security problems.
So it's that global engagement idea we were talking about earlier?
Right, but the article's careful. They say it's got to be selective, strategic.
Right, because otherwise you could stretch NATO too thin, get bogged down in conflicts that aren't really their problem.
Exactly. It's not about getting involved everywhere.
Right.
It's about choosing their battles carefully.
Makes sense. So being strategic, effective, not just like reacting to whatever crisis pops up.
Precisely. And last but not least, the article emphasizes public support.
Right, we talked about that before, but it's really important.
It's crucial.
Yeah.
Making sure people understand why NATO exists, why it matters, and are willing to support it, even when it costs money.
Yeah, because ultimately it's the people who pay the price, right?
Absolutely.
So NATO needs to be more transparent, communicate better, explain why collective security is good for everyone.
Right. And they also need to acknowledge that they're not perfect.
They've made mistakes.
They have. And they need to keep learning, keep changing.
Be open to new ideas.
Exactly. If they want to stay relevant in this century, they can't be stuck in the past. Got to adapt to this crazy, fast-changing world.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Well, we've covered a lot in this deep dive. It's been fascinating. From NATO's beginnings to the challenges they're facing now to this vision for the future.
It has been quite a journey.
And I think the big takeaway here is NATO is at a turning point.
Yeah, a crossroads.
They have a choice. Hold on to the old ways or step up, adapt, and become even stronger.
It's a choice that's going to shape the future, not just for NATO, but for all of us.
Well, listeners, that's it for our deep dive on NATO. We hope you have a better understanding of this alliance now, how it works, the challenges it faces, and what's at stake for the future. It's complicated stuff, but it matters. The choices we make today will shape the world of tomorrow, so stay informed, stay engaged, and make your voice heard. Thanks for listening.